Welcome to another episode of Give It a Nudge. Today we have a slightly different episode. We have got Ben Ford on the show. Ben Ford is a bit of a specialist when it comes to fintechs here in Australia, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about that and what he's learned during his time doing that. But he's also going to talk about a new passion project that he's got and potentially another opportunity. So this could be a long episode, but let's see how we go. Ben, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. What a great studio we've got to work out of.
We do love this new studio, I have to say. It's very fancy.
I know it well. Very good.
Have you spent time in here before?
I have. So this is, I recorded a podcast with Brad here for TankStream Speaks back in the day, or a little while ago. And I've been a long-term TankStream Labs resident since 2017.
So was that back in the original building on Bridge Street?
Absolutely, Bridge Street.
Bridge West building, yeah.
Yes, and it was, who was in there at that time? Alistair Lamond from Skipper. That was a very early sort of pioneering fintech. He's now at Judo Bank. Chris Bricky at StockSpot was there.
There were some massive ones back then.
Yeah, Airwallex were there. Sorry, Airwallex. Airtasker were founded out of there. Tim's a founder or an investor in.
You see Jono's here at the moment? I saw him this morning.
I believe so, yeah, absolutely. So TankStream Labs is kind of an OG startup space. Some great companies come out of there, and I've got some very fond memories of working out of there, particularly Bridge Street, but now the various other offices as well.
And they're growing.
Absolutely.
They are growing. I mean, you've been in this startup space a relatively long period of time. I'm not going to say a very long, because that would be the wrong thing to say. But, you know, I guess you've really seen this ecosystem change and evolve, which it has a lot in what is a pretty short space of time, I would think. When did you first start getting involved, do you reckon?
It has. Probably we'll come back to that in a minute. Probably. So I moved to Australia in 2010, worked for Dun & Bradstreet. They sponsored me to come over, worked for there for 6 years. But it was around about 2014 that we started to get inquiries from lenders doing some pretty cool fintechy type stuff. So early Afterpay, Zip were a client of ours. For Prosper, what was a precursor to Wise Direct Money. And they were keen to use us for AML KYC services. Right, so they wanted to do a check for customers. At the time, we had a sort of partnership with Green ID. So we had a product called D&B Green ID. Not a very creative name. But,
it rhymes.
It did the trick. And our aim was to really topple or challenge Vader, as it was, which is now Equifax in the ID space. So we were really going after Darth Vader.
Did they really call it that?
Darth Vader? Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who did work there called it Darth Vader. Now, I worked for Equifax for a bit in the UK, so I wasn't so negative on it, but it was a good name and it stuck. And at the time, and still now, I guess, in the credit bureau space, they had a bit of a monopoly. So people were always looking for a more dynamic and potentially a cheaper alternative with good customer service. So we had some pretty cool clients at Dun & Bradstreet. But yeah, that was the first sort of exposure I got to, I guess, the new wave of fintechs coming in that weren't even called fintechs, or it was just sort of, bubbling up. 2015, 2016, there were a few knocking around, like Pocketbook since 2012, which is kind of the OG of certainly PFM, personal financial management tools in Australia. Probably one of the OG fintechs. And
was
a great
it about
story.
The same time Raise came out, right? Well, it wasn't called Raise, it was called Acorns.
Acorns.
Yes.
So I worked with Acorns before they were even called Acorns.
Oh,
or before
what were they called then?
No, they were a stealth project.
Right.
And George Lucas, who founded it, and ultimately Brendan came in before launch. So we'd sold, I think, $150,000 worth of AML KYC checks to Raise on a 12-month rolling contract. They were due to launch at the beginning of it. They didn't launch until 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the contract, and they spent nothing. I'd been paid the commission up front, as happened time to time in those bureaus. So that was great. Everyone was sort of getting a little bit nervous, and Raise or Acorns launched, and within a month, they'd put on 40,000 users.
I was one of the first users on there. I remember very well.
Same.
And I still got it.
Yeah, same. And it's a great app. And if you go back to sort of thinking about what Raise did then, and you were sort of, well, here's a way that you could you could link my bank account, which was kind of new.
That was really new.
The lenders had been doing it, but no one else.
The roundups was completely, I couldn't get my head around how it was happening. It was wild. You almost kept buying things to see if it was working.
Absolutely. And young people and millennials to invest in the market now didn't need to put 5 or 10 grand in a mutual fund, which back then they probably didn't have.
Yep.
So now they could get exposure, they could learn about investing in mutual funds or ETFs or whatever it is, they're kind of the same thing. And they could be passively investing, building up some semblance of wealth or a modicum of wealth and starting to see the effects of investing and passive investing. And it was just mind-blowing. You know, I was like so taken with this. And that was, I guess, what sort of fueled my interest in fintech, seeing companies like StockSpot with their robo-advice. You know, you don't now have to pay a fund manager 2.5% or 3% to manage your money. They'll do it for 0.5%, and their returns, hey, guess what? They're probably going to be about the same or better.
They were about the same.
Yeah. And yeah, that was a sort of great time in fintech, the sort of halcyon days, I think, 2015 to 17, 16 to 18, some great fintechs that are still around today.
There's sort of been waves of fintechs, right, haven't there? Because then they all sort of grew and did quite well, and then there was this next massive wave, which you were involved with as well.
Yep.
So, sort of give us some idea of how you've been involved in that fintech explosion. Maybe there's almost another one coming, right? So, sort of 3 times round.
Maybe, yeah, potentially. So initially, I guess it was sort of as a vendor at Dun & Bradstreet selling to those very early stage fintechs. So that was sort of building, I guess, starting to get exposure to them. You know, there were some very early stage investment opportunities, some which turned out to be dogs, some which turned out to be okay. And then there was, I spent a year in the UK trying to establish Green ID over there, which was the AML KYC tool. And that was good. So to get some exposure to the London startup scene, the office was one of the early WeWorks, which was pretty cool. Moorgate in London, which I think was one of the OG WeWorks in London. And that was, you know, my first exposure to places that, say, had a free bar after 4 o'clock, which got too popular on Fridays, so they had to bring in a gate so you could only get in using
They actually put a gate in.
Well, people were just coming in, bringing in their mates on a Friday afternoon, and the place was turning into anarchy. So it was very necessary to do that. And then came back and worked for a company called Yodlee, which was a Silicon Valley screen scraping provider. So they were provided the functionality to enable Raise, to link the bank account and go through your transactions to round up the money. So I set up the Sydney office. That was what we set up in Tankstream Labs. And there were 2 of us in country, but working for, I guess, a Silicon Valley unicorn. I think by that point they were worth $1 billion US.
It was really big, I remember.
And had the entire market in the US and loads of clients over here. And no real competition. This was before Luke Howes founded Proviso, but they launched about the same time and started to do pretty well in the lending space. I was then recruited by the CEO of Ilion to go back to Dun & Bradstreet / Ilion. So that ended up being 8 years in total I spent with what was Dun & Bradstreet. There was a bit of crazy stuff going on there around workplace culture and things that made the news. We were largely exempt from it because we were sort of a satellite part of the business, but in the main bureau, there was...
We don't need to go into that.
No, so let's brush over that. But around that time, I was sort of rescued by Gareth at Frollo. They'd been a client of mine at Yodlee. They were, again, one of my early favourite fintechs, a personal management tool. See all of your bank accounts on a single app, manage your money better, get insights into your spending and start planning a financial future as you sort of go through the stages of life. And ended up going to work there, and they were heavily involved in open banking. So I'd already been very close to the open banking scene, but this was sort of deep in the weeds with
it's
open
still
banking.
going, open banking. It's still not what it promised to be yet. It's been a long, it's pretty close, but I feel like it's like the longest promise. I feel like it's like a government promise. They keep getting closer, but it doesn't really quite get to what they said at the beginning.
Correct. It's I forget the quote, but never before has so much been promised by so few, or vice versa, something and like delivered. That. But I do remember early 2017, I was part of a Fintech Australia delegation by virtue of the job at Yodlee to go and meet with Scott Farrell at Mallison's, I think it was. There was Bosco Tan from Pocketbook, Alvin from Pocketbook, two very smart founders. A couple of other people, and the CEO, Daniel Cetho, who was then CEO of Fintech Australia. And we went to meet with Scott Farrell, and this was literally a couple of months before he wrote the Farrell Report, which became the Consumer Data Right and the legislation for open banking. If you'd said then, is it going to be 7 years to get where we are now and still have the adoption that we've got now, which is still relatively modest, unfortunately,
really, really poor.
Then yeah, would we be happy with that? And I think probably not many people would have expected it to take as long to get to where we are now as it has done.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the financial system. There's been ups
Yes.
and downs going on in there around other things during that time as well that have distracted them, to be fair. But
Correct.
it is a bit disappointing. So, and how long were you at Follow for?
Just under 3 years.
Yeah, okay.
Just under 3 years. And then was recruited to Timely,
Yep.
who again were going to be a client of Frollo. We spent 18 months courting them. We sort of won the Timely business. For various reasons, that didn't come off. It was, let's definitely not go into that. But on the basis of that, Timely said, would you be interested in coming over to us? And yeah, I sort of was right for a change. And also I sort of had this, I didn't, at the time, I thought 6 years in and around the sort of open banking sphere or realm. If I go away for a couple of years and then have to come back in 2 years' time, will it have moved on that much that I will have lost all of the,
Evidently not.
Yeah, I don't believe so. So I may be proved wrong, but I think there'll probably be some more open banking to go around in 3 or 4 years' time if I want to go.
Do you know the best thing about this episode is we've mentioned 3 things that we're not going to talk about, which means people are pausing this episode and they're getting onto Google, they're stopping their cars and they're looking up what happened down at Brown Street, what happened at They're all looking up such these things we didn't. So it's going to be a really elongated episode where people are going to learn a lot of things they didn't need to and we didn't need to tell them.
Correct.
How good is that?
Absolutely. And yeah, they'll definitely find plenty of stuff on Google, I can tell you.
And so how do you feel now about fintech? Do you feel that you've really been on that long ride and it has subsided a little bit here in Sydney and Australia and across the whole country, actually. And maybe not so much in the US, but definitely here in London, it's subsided from what it was. It almost dominated the startup scene for so long. Do you feel like, I feel like there's another wave coming with the AI tools and so forth and Web3 actually being used in an effective way rather than everyone just wibbling on about crypto. And the crypto thing's sort of come and gone, obviously, and you could kind of call that fintech if you were a brave person, which I'm not. But do you think there's another wave of these personal apps coming, or do you think the current ones and the current companies that have got there, because there's quite a lot that haven't been acquired by large organizations, which is typically what did happen. Do you think they will morph, or do you think we'll get new players coming in challenging the old new companies, I guess, in some respect?
It's quite a hard question to answer, Steve.
That's the idea.
Yeah, I'll have a go. So I think things have been tough for the last couple of years from a funding perspective. And I think that's probably because lots of fintechs that came on the scene, probably in the sort of COVID era, 2021, haven't really sort of kicked on to the next level. And I think so it feels like there's not been a huge number of really good, solid fintechs come around to sort of pique your interest. It's almost like all the good ideas have been taken. Like there's not a Raise or a StockSpot or even a Timely with an 18-minute consumer home loan or something like that. There's not those sort of things that catch your attention and really grab you. I mean, I saw something on LinkedIn the other day called Fingertip. I don't know if you've seen this, where so a guy I sort of worked with at a couple of other places or just got to know him. He left that business, and it's basically a sort of one pager about yourself. It's like your LinkedIn profile on a business card, but on an app or on a phone. So I would look at yours, and instead of a LinkedIn bio or instead of a website, it would just be a sort of concise version of who Steve is and the various businesses and projects you're involved in and your various brands. And I guess you can distribute it to other people. So if I was
digital elevator pitch, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. And there's Gabby Libovitz, who founded Catch.com, and has invested in a few things. He's involved as an investor. But I just remember seeing it and I thought, actually, that just makes real sense.
Good name too. I like the name.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess you can sort of send it to people here and there, and it just sort of you don't. It's not hard to understand. With a lot of fintechs, you ask people what they do, and it's like, we've got a wallet and there's a card attached. and you can send money and you can do this and there's some crypto, and it's like, well.
Everything. You can do everything.
Yeah, there's 30 of these, and it just seems odd. But this just seems like something could capture people's imagination, could probably scale pretty quickly. And I could see use cases. I'd have one for some new projects. I was just thinking, well, this would be great.
I'm going to look at it. I'm going to look it up. And whoever's founded it,
Yep.
will be thanking you as soon as this episode comes out because you've just done free PR.
There you go, Ollie Hoffman. I want a free fingertip account. But so that's interesting. But in terms of fintech, there's not been loads of these. I just judged the Finnies. I won't say which category, but it just felt like a lot of the.
I was there at the awards.
Oh, that was the fintech award.
Oh, that was
this is
the
the Finnies.
This
This
is,
is
you're judging them all.
serial fintech awards judge. Correct. Prolific. And take it pretty seriously. And so, like some of these awards, that's a podcast episode in and of itself, so we won't go into that now. But there just wasn't loads of creativity, and because I guess it's pretty hard. But I think fintech's in a bit of a lull. I think probably a lot of people got attracted to it with ideas that weren't particularly good, got some initial funding, but when it's come to execute, they're kind of there's not the product market fit, or there's not the.
Well, we're going to see that with AI, right? If you put AI on the end of your pitch deck, you've got a much higher chance of getting funded, regardless of the idea. And we'll see the same thing. I think you're right. I think there's been a lack of, and I hate to say innovation in the startup space because that's a ridiculous thing to say, but I think there's just going to be, because it's almost not been stale, but it's been a lot of samey with little tweaks, not massive changes. I feel like we're going to see a huge one. But let's not worry about that anymore. Let's talk about your latest thing that you're about to launch, which I think is super cool.
Okay.
Why don't you tell us what it is and then give us the backstory, if you're comfortable doing that?
Absolutely. So this is a charity foundation, I think, at the moment. It's not a charity. It's a charity foundation.
What's the difference?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Something else for them to stop. They're back on Google again.
Absolutely. It seems like it's quite hard to delineate between the two. I think it's probably more onerous to register an official charity
think so.
than a fundraising entity that's going to raise money to distribute funds to different charities.
I think as an individual, you can create a foundation, but I don't think you can just create a charity like that. No, I think you're right.
So I think it might be a staged approach. So it might start off being the foundation, moving to the charity. But this is about raising funds, or using an opportunity we've got to raise funds for mental health, or to support mental health endeavours, particularly amongst professional people, or people who perhaps, because of the positions they're in or their roles they're in, don't have the ability or the outlet to, or don't think that they've got the outlet to have a reset or ask for help. Is there, and we'll move on to sort of the backstory, but is there something that can be done in this area between things building up to a point where it's too late?
Yep.
And is there a support mechanism that can be supported or helped in the interim to sort of pull people away from getting to that sort of.
So it's mental health to a point, but it's sort of slightly different. It's not sort of, it's a far more preventional kind of thing that you're thinking about rather than a treatment.
Absolutely, I think so. In the first instance, that seems like the most or the simplest way to do it, and really the goal is to align with the most appropriate charities that exist at the moment, distribute funds through them, and then ultimately maybe get to a point where we have our own sort of solutions and services that would come as a full-scale charity further down the track. And this is going to be based in London and Australia.
Okay.
And is really sort of building on the, I guess, the groundswell of interest that we saw not so long ago. Had a tragedy in the family. My sister-in-law lost her life, and she was perhaps the most capable, strongest, hardworking, successful person I knew. A senior equity partner in a law firm, mother of two, multiple, investments, houses, managed the whole thing. And ultimately, things got too much for her almost before anyone really knew. There were clues, or one or two people might have seen it, but ultimately, the people around her, a lot of the people around her, had no inkling whatsoever that anything was wrong until it was.
Which is unfortunately quite common.
It's the more people you speak to, absolutely, it seems to be almost the norm from what conversations I've had, or at least in 50% of the cases when you talk to people around sort of suicide and similar types of death. This actually wasn't found to be a suicide in the end, but there's probably technical reasons for that. But yeah, absolutely. And so, is there anything that can be done in that middle ground to stop the person who, on the face of it, to all external appearances, seems completely dialed in and at the top of their game and an absolute coper, to stop them getting to the stage where they think that things are too much for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I think you hit it on the head there in that, there's often signs, but there's more than often not, I think. And it does seem to be people that are at the top of their game.
Yeah.
It's almost like what's driving that, the masking of it is part of it, I think. Anyway, you can talk about that quite a long time because there's a lot of subject matter there. But you've named the charity after her, correct?
Absolutely. It's the Vanessa Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
She was my sister-in-law, married to my brother. We thought this would be, this sort of blew up, and particularly because she was a professional in a law firm, a senior equity partner, it sort of garnered all of this sort of news coverage, which was very surreal, very bizarre, very distressing. And it was around the work-life balance of lawyers, particularly mums, because one of the things that came out in the coroner's inquest was Vanessa felt extreme guilt about spending time away from her sons.
Which is very common.
Absolutely. And it just seemed to sort of really touch a nerve amongst professionals, lawyers especially, and women, and kind of sort of went peculiarly viral in that it was in the Times, the Telegraph in the UK, the Independent, I think the BBC covered it, the Law.com covered it.
That's wild.
Flagship story. And then people were sort of posting on LinkedIn. This is how it sort of came back to, I was sort of following it on the news, but then, people I knew over here had sort of seen something on LinkedIn where someone had posted something pretty, innocuous, but very sort of well-meaning post, and it would get 7,000 likes and 400 comments or things like that. So it obviously sort of resonated. And I just thought this would be a really good way of shining a light on, what's a problem for all professionals, not just lawyers, actually, and also sort of remembering Vanessa because she was. She was, as I say, she was extremely well known. She had this pretty high professional profile in legal circles, and the idea came to me, Steve, and thought, how come I not thought of this before?
You're going to do it. Yeah. Well, you're probably distracted with other things, or there's a lot of reasons. And so, how far away is that from launching? If people are interested in finding out more, if they want to get involved, do we put something in the bottom of the chat of the episode, or?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it's a case of building up interest. We've got to speak to legal firms.
Yep.
There's some talk going on. My brother, who's the widower.
Widower. That's
Widower.
Right. Yep.
He's meeting with her law firm later this month.
Yep.
I think so, to discuss next steps, and I guess it would be good to get some legal firm involvement. I think Everton Football Club, who she was working with, they've been great since then, and just see if we can sort of formulate a charter for the charity, get some very reputable trustees on board, so that the governance is really completely on point and just sort of really well run and well managed, and just start to sort of push out, build up the list, and then start to create some events and some fundraising initiatives, and take it from there.
Well, we'll keep following it on this show. We'll come back and talk about that when you're ready to really go bang, so to speak.
Yeah, that would be good.
Awesome. And then last topic of the day.
Yes.
Yourself. What's happening with you now? Where are you looking to go next in your journey?
I have spent the last few weeks casing out a couple of opportunities. I think to your point, I think there's some startups that have potential, not necessarily in fintech. So I think there might be
exciting
bit of an adjacency to fintech. So there's a Proptech organisation that we're looking to establish over here. Just signed their first Australian customer.
And where's that from?
That's from the UK.
Right, yep.
That's a UK company. Reasonable, seems to be some product market fit in the UK. Australian client signed and contracted, not yet live. So that's the SaaS play in the Proptech space. And then the other thing that I'm just sort of working on, and I've been finessing for a little while, is a logistics business.
Oh,
so
that's really left field.
Sort of in the realm. It's a startup that I've been advising for probably a couple of years now. In the realm of ship it and send all.
So that last mile, they last mile, or they're not.
No,
last
they're
mile.
not really last mile. They're so it's a slightly different model to the send all model, but it's sort of in that space.
Okay.
So it's a business that sort of does well with fairly limited resource so far.
Sounds good.
Looking to absolutely. So run by a guy who's a real quiet achiever. I think there's a bit of potential there. We've been sort of messing around for a couple of years on various sort of iterations and ideas to sort of push it on a bit with a go-to-market effort around the sales and marketing. So that's exciting.
Two things. That's a lot. You're going to be busy again, and you will no longer be able to call you Ben Fintech Forward.
It might be Proptech Forward going forward.
Or logistics forward. That doesn't really work, does it? We're going to have to work on that one.
Logtech Forward. So no, we'll stick with Fintech Forward for now. But
well, no, yeah. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I think it's so good to have people who've been and seen that ecosystem grow, and also the bouncing back between the UK and Australia. Obviously, I do the same. Being from the UK, we have a nudge office over there as well. It's fascinating to see. For me, I find it fascinating to see the difference between the UK and the Australian ecosystems. They're very different. I mean, the population makes a big difference as well, but it's quite interesting to see the trends. And unfortunately, we do still seem to be last. And I still don't understand it. I got why we were last when it took 2 weeks by ship to get here, but it's under 24 hours now. There's really no excuse for it. I just don't understand. But maybe you will change that. Maybe I will change that. Who knows?
Maybe, Steve. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll be over there next month. I'll be at Money 2020 Europe, which is a big fintech festival. I went there last year, and to your point, the scale there,
massive,
and just I guess it's a concentration of big countries or populations that can all converge in a central European country, and it's sort of, you go from having a consumer audience in the UK of whatever, 60 million, 65 million people, 40 million credit active, you would assume, or 40 million adults, and then multiply that by Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, and then, the numbers get smaller, but there's another 15, 20 European countries who are all, active, lots of talent, lots of IT skills or development skills, getting into Scandinavia. So it's almost sort of, it's kind of a continent, and I know Australasia is a continent, but we're essentially two or three countries, or however many it is, right?
No, it's wild. I mean, I've been to events over there, and it's the events. I mean, in some respects, I like the events here because you know a lot of people and you can make some really good connections. There, it's almost overwhelming with how many people there are, and I found it actually harder to connect in those larger events than it is in the smaller ones.
Oh yeah, and getting around. You get your steps up for sure, it is hard to sort of connect on an intimate basis. I'm thinking back to Money 2020 in Amsterdam last year. It was just crazy. But you do so, and I think sometimes it's on the margins. You see the real innovation. It's not the sort of the Visa stand or the MasterCard stand.
It's definitely not there.
It's the ones out in the corner who've got some cool robotics or some AI or some obscure fintech payment process or something like that. That's really interesting.
What are they going to do in robotics in fintech?
I don't know what they're going to do.
You know what I saw the other day? Someone introduced me the other day to a robotic cocktail maker. It's a robot that sits on a bar, and it can make, I think, 1 of 200 cocktails perfectly, and it's crazy. We need those here.
Yeah, let's go. I saw the robotics coffee machine, but that was probably only 5 coffees, so it was probably things have moved on. Obviously,
this was in Singapore. There's lots of crazy things in Singapore. So,
absolutely.
Well, look, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you sharing both your past, your future, and what you're doing currently with your new foundation. So, thank you for that. I will definitely get you back on once that foundation is launched, and we'll probably do some more content around that to help promote that as well. That'd be super good.
Very good. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's slightly different episode. I found it super interesting. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week.